I have been working my way through the book of Job, looking at the Hebrew, and along with translation and brief a brief commentary. Uh, in chapter 38, verses 39 to 39:30, we have a new topic. We've alluded to this in a previous video, having discussed the inanimate creation in 38. In these verses, the author has the animate creation pass before Job's sight. God continues his challenge to Job by asking him to look at the animate creation, to observe its diversity and habits, and to see God's power and intelligence in providing and caring for them. So we are now at chapter 38, where we'll be looking, or 39, I should say, where we will be looking at the wild goats and the wild ass in the first 8 verses. So we begin. Hayadata 8 ledet ya'ale sala holal ayalot tishmor. Do you know the time, Job is being asked, when the wild goats of the rock bring forth or bear? Or can you mark when the hinds calve or bring forth and bear? Notice here we have a polel form in hul, third masculine singular, and then we have another form, ledet, cow infinitive construct from Yalad. So basically, what God is asking Job is, does Job know the time when the wild goats, who are a very shy animal, give forth in birth? God asks Job if he can regulate the laws of birth in these animals. Then we move on to verse 2. Tispor Yerachim Temalena V'yadata 8 Lid Tana. That is, can you number, Job, the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time of their bringing forth, of their bearing? Notice in verse 2 here, can Job tell how many months they carry their young before birth, is the question. And then in verse 3, Takrana Yaldehin Tefalachna Hevlehim Teshalachna. That is, they bow down and they bring forth their young and cast out their offspring. Notice here, they bow down. It's interesting, all of these forms here are third feminine, cow imperfect, third feminine plural in all of these forms, referring to the different animals that Job is being asked to survey and to observe. So it is interesting. Can Job figure that out? Seems to be the question that the Lord is asking him. Are you able to put all that together, Job? And if not, how can you understand my sovereignty? A couple things here. Kara means to bow down, and hevel means the pains of travail in giving birth and the pains. Are you able, or do you know, Job, the time of birth and the pains of their travail? Uh, when they bring forth, they bow down, and their pains of travail as they cast out their uh, offspring, we could say. Do you understand that, Job? This is God's question. And can the wild goats, who very easily give birth to their young then will grow strong in the open field. Afterwards, they leave their parents and they do not return. It is God who overlooks them and cares for them throughout all of this. And that is mentioned further in verse 4. Yachlemo v'nehem yirbu bar. That is, they're young, they become strong, they grow up in the open field, bar. They go forth and they do not return. And so the thought is, Job, how does God overlook and care for, how does God who oversees care for them throughout all of this? Then he comes to the wild ass in verses 5 to 8. And in this, we have some vocabulary words that might be helpful to look at. We have ber or perre, which means wild ass. Hofshi means free. Musar means band or bond. Arod is the wild ass. And melacha would be barrenness. And then sahak is to laugh and play sport or sport. And Kiryah is town or city. And then we have Teshua would be noise. And Nogas is in this context a participle meaning a driver or a taskmaster. Yatur means searching, and mir'ah would be like pasture. And yadom, yarok means a green thing. And re'em is wild ox, and avus means like a crib or a feeding trough. So let me just read that and talk about it just briefly. Notice in verse 4 or verse 5, we're now going to be looking at the wild ox. Mishalach pera chofshi, who sends forth the pera, the wild ass, free. In other words, in the open country. Me, notice, mesorot, arod mi peteach. Who has, and their bands, literally, who has loosed the bands of the wild ass is the thought here. And notice peteach is a PL perfect, third masculine singular from patach. So who has loosed the bands of the wild ox? Notice the rod here is the noun meaning wild ox. And so what God is asking Job here is, who set the wild ass free and loose the band or the bonds of servitude which control his tamer brother? Asked God. The implication is clear. God gives him his freedom. Then we move on to the next verse, verse 6. Asher samta Arava Beito, Umishkonatav Melecha. That is, who has placed or made the Arava, the wilderness, his house or his dwelling place. And then his dwelling place, Umishkonotav Melecha, his dwelling place of salt. In other words, salt land is his dwelling place. And so, again, he's asking that question about the wild ass. As we look at this particular verse here, God has made the wild ass, the text is saying, to live in uncultivated lands, far away from the fruitful land where men dwell. And then he's going to be away from all the noise too. So in verse 7, as we continue then, it reads, he scorns or he laughs, Yishchok lehamon kiryah. He laughs at the tumult of the city. Teshuot nogesh lo yishma. And he does not hear the shoutings of the driver here. In other words, he does not hear the shouting of those that would be a taskmaster or driver. No case here is a cow, a participle, masculine singular from nakas. And so is the yishchak. It's a cow stem as well, third masculine singular from sachak. So he scorns or he laughs at the tumult of the city. And he does not heed or hear or keep, literally, the shoutings here, he does not hear the shoutings of the driver. Very different from being in a populous area. And so he's driving home. He's apart from all the noise. And who created this? Who loosed the wild ass and made the wild ass to live in these uncultivated lands far away from the fruitful land where men dwell? And as far as drivers, while tame donkeys are driven by men, the wild ass is free from obeying the shout of men or the noise of the city that his tame brother must endure. So who has created this? One of the interesting things as I've been reading this chapter is the way that the Lord has, can I say, variety in his creation. And it just sort of is amazing to me as I'm reading this chapter. Then we come to verse 8. Yatur harim mil-ehu. The range of the mountains is his pasture. V'achar kol yarok yedrosh. And then after every green thing, he continues to search. So the range of the mountains are his pasture, and he's searching after every green thing. Yedrosh is just your cow imperfect, third masculine singular from darash. So free from the dependence of men, the wild ass must roam over wide ranges of mountains for his food. His total dependency is on God to provide. Could Job give this animal its freedom and provide for it. It's interesting. My wife and I just put out some bread today outside of our where we live, and a lot of the birds came very shortly. And so the Lord was using us. We commented on to provide for the birds at that point. It's interesting. That is what verse 8 is applying to the wild ass. In other words, free from any dependence of men, where we basically provided for the birds, the wild ass must roam over these wide ranges of mountain for his food. And his total dependency is on God, as we said, to provide it. Could Job give this animal its freedom and care for it or provide for it? So he's going to continue going through a number of animals. He'll move next to the wild ox, and then he'll move to the ostrich and so forth. But I'm going to stop here and just slowly work my way through this section along with commentary. Thank you.